Mike, you joining us today. You can answer some of the questions from Facebook that were posted. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing here today, why you're doing it, what your organization's looking for.
Sure. So Mike Quinlan, I'm the chair of the school building committee for the town of Medfield. For those that may not have seen, we've been working on coming up with the best possible option to repair or replace the existing Dale Street School. Our current preferred option is a replacement school. That'll be at the Wheelock site, and we're super excited about it. We think it's a great option. We think there's a lot of great opportunities for the kids to really have a great space to learn in. And as we approach a fall town meeting, special town meeting, to vote on the project and vote on funding of the project, we'll be spending more and more time making sure the word gets out about what we're asking for from the town. And we certainly have some challenges that we need to get through financially, but because it's a big ask, but we believe we're going to be able to present the best possible option for the town.
Awesome. We're going to start with one of the questions. This comes from Michelle. We actually took two of her questions and combined them, so you see there's 51 total likes on her two questions that she had. So this question comes and it says, what were the major factors that led to the SBC selecting the Wheelock site? What are the synergistic opportunities from having second and fifth grade in one larger campus? How will resources be shared? How will this affect school budget needs going forward?
Sure. This is a great question, and one of the things we've spent a great deal of time looking at when we came up with our preference to put the building at Wheelock. There are two major categories that I would say led to that decision. The first is the educational benefits, and then the second had to do with physical limitations of the existing site. So I'll take the educational benefits first. Medfield has not a unique composition, but certainly not the norm in that we have 3 elementary schools that all of our children attend. And you know, many towns in Massachusetts use a K-5 model with neighborhood schools, and that's a different approach to education. But given where we are, and the fact that I think there's some sentiment in town to keep things in that configuration, we looked at it from an educational perspective. But our current model has kids going from pre-K, K, and 1 at Memorial to a 2 to 3 at Wheelock, and then back to the Memorial Dale site for 4 to 5, and then off to the middle school, high school site. So in 5 years, from 1st grade to 6th grade, kids are transitioning 3 times within 5 years, and that's something that can be a struggle for a lot of kids. So by moving the grades 4 to 5 to the Wheelock site, we now have, at the very least, while they are separate buildings, we have a campus that's a 2 to 5 campus. So kids are transitioning from the Memorial School to the upper elementary school campus of 2 to 5, and then to Blake and the high school. So it basically takes at least one site transition out of the equation. What that also does is that allows the programs, things especially with special ed, where teachers can then transition with the kids, so that they could be easily transitioned from 2 to 3 up to 4 to 5 and still be able to work with the same kids. And that's also true of many of the staff as well, who the specialist teachers, art teachers, music teachers, they are multi-building teachers. They don't position themselves in one building like a homeroom teacher, classroom elementary school teacher. So for them to be able to easily flow between the 2 buildings makes for a significant benefit. The ability for the kids to be able to see consistency in some of their teachers across 4 grades. And on top of that, then the physical resources. By building a new elementary school up to today's standards, where we actually include gym space that is far superior to the existing gym space they have currently, as well as amenities like the band and music spaces. Those are spaces that could be utilized by the Wheelock kids now as well, since they would be a short walk across the courtyard to those areas. So those are some of the key learning objectives, educational objectives that we looked at when evaluating the two properties. And then another one to touch on, which I'll address a little more later as well, is outdoor learning. Outdoor learning is becoming more and more integrated into elementary school education, and having a site that has the flexibility and the space to be able to accommodate creative spaces outside. So that leads me to the physical constraints of the different sites. The Dale Street site is approximately 17 acres, and it's currently about 40% covered by building and impervious area, parking lots, etc. And putting a new building or even an expanded existing Dale on site increases that to almost 52%. That is a density that we would expect to see in a place like Cambridge, Somerville, Newton, Watertown, not in a town like Medfield. The Wheelock site is 48 acres, and if the new school gets approved, the amount of impervious area would go from 10% to 22%. So still very low density, and again, more opportunities for outdoor learning and those types of things would be a huge help. So those are the key factors in how the SBC came about their recommendation to the Board of Selectmen for the Wheelock site, and why the Board of Selectmen ultimately voted to support that.
There's almost, if you don't mind, there's almost two parts to this question. So I think you did a great job talking about why it was selected. She does ask, how will this affect school budget needs going forward? Is there a projection on what the budget's actually going to have?
So there is a projection. I'm not the expert on the school budget. I leave that to the experts. I think that's a better question, more suited for the school committee and the school administration. I'm not an expert in how it's going to increase. I can tell you from a facility perspective how much it will probably increase in terms of operating costs, but in terms of staffing, in terms of efficiencies that could help reduce the school budget, I think that would be more a question for Dr. Marsden and the school committee.
This question is another one that we combined, Renee and Jessica. It says, there is clear division in town around building this school at Wheelock. Please clearly outline the steps to be followed if the town votes no. How much would we forfeit in time and state aid if the town votes against the proposed project?
Okay, this is an excellent question. Certainly one that we'll address more, including at a special town meeting in the fall. First, let me address the statement about division. It's not unexpected. I build elementary schools as part of my job. I've never seen one unanimously supported. I wish we could have found a site and a project that every single voter could vote and get behind. That just doesn't exist. So division is common and expected, and I fully expect that there'll be plenty of residents who will look at all the same facts that we looked at and come up with a different conclusion. So that's not something that's unexpected. I can tell you, having stood before this town twice to ask for capital facility projects, which are large expenditures, I wouldn't be presumptuous to say that I know how people are going to vote. I don't. I expect that we're going to make a great case for this project, and I do know that the voters of Medfield will take the time and factor that in. If the town does vote no, then there are a few different scenarios. So I'll walk through those. If, for instance, we need a 2/3 vote on a debt exclusion in order to get that approved. That's a very high bar. So let's assume something happens where we get 65% of the vote, but not 66.67%. If it's that close, then we might choose to revote it. The MSBA, we would write to the MSBA and ask them, say we're close, but we think that we can perhaps sway a few voters to change their mind, and they would likely grant us an extension to be able to revote the same project. Let me be clear though, that's the same project. That would mean the same site, the same size. The budget could be reduced if there was something we could do that wouldn't sacrifice the program, the educational program, if it just meant, taking some dollars out to be able to get us over the finish line, if that were the issue, then we would be allowed to do that. that would have to happen pretty quickly. We would have to revote it quickly. If there were a major gap, let's say, for instance, it came out 50-50 or something like that, then that sends a different message to us as the school building committee and to the leadership of the board of selectmen. The town would then have a few options. Could decide just to do nothing at all, and we are continue to operate in our existing condition with the same issues that we're facing at the Dale Street School. The town could choose to resubmit a new statement of interest with the MSBA to get back into the program. That would likely take a minimum of 4 to 5 years for that cycle to go through. The MSBA does not have the ability just to tie up funds infinitely while we sort of tinker around, figure out what we want to do as a town. They have many towns that are aching for the kind of support that right now they've committed to us. So if we don't show them that we're ready to support a school of this type of project, then they will move on and we will have to try again. And then, the other option would be that we build a school by ourselves. And in order to do that without the MSBA support, it would obviously have to be significantly less expensive and thus significantly smaller. And we'd have to consider whether it'd be even large enough to cover our current enrollments. So that would be something that would be an option. It may not be a great option, but those are the options. And then in terms of the question about how much would we forfeit in state aid, the current projection for this project is that we'll receive approximately $17 to $18 million from the MSBA as part of this project. As those numbers will be finalized before town meeting. They are in flux, but that's probably the range we're expecting to see. So that would potentially be lost if we choose to vote no.
Just for clarification, MSBA is the what?
Massachusetts School Building Authority. So the Massachusetts School Building Authority is funded through the sales tax. So when we pay 6.25% or 6.5% on our sales tax, 1 penny of that goes to the MSBA to support our schools throughout the Commonwealth. And they fund projects all over the state, and they work with towns on a partnership level to ensure that the schools that are built are built wisely and cover not just the financial needs of the town, but the educational needs of the town. They've been a great partner so far, and we hope to continue working with them.
Our third question comes from Chris. She says, on 2 occasions at town meeting, Medfield taxpayers purchased land or accepted a land donation behind Wheelock School specifically to protect its well fields. Why now is it deemed okay to build a second school on land that was presumed to be left open to help protect our open space and a well field?
So there's 2 aspects of that I'd like to touch on. One is open space, and the other is the drinking water in the well fields. The land there dates back in the gift and the acquisition. It was sort of two parts to it. There was a certain part of it that was acquired by the town through payment, and then there was another part that was gifted. Regardless, both pieces of that property were never put into any sort of conservation or any other protections. They were there for the town to use as the town so chose. There was reference back in 1979 when they were required to conservation and well field protection. And so in terms of open space and conservation, let me just touch on that. The Medfield is actually a pretty remarkable town. It's one of the main reasons I moved here is because of the high volume of open space. The largest landowner, at least as of 2016, I haven't seen any updates to it. The largest landowner in Massachusetts is actually the Trustees of Reservations, which is a conservation agency. They own over 1,300 acres in Medfield. The town itself owns over 950 acres of protected land. Now that's not land that the school or the town hall or anybody sits on. Those are protected open space land acres. And then the third largest landowner in Medfield is the Army Corps of Engineers. They own 427 acres, as well as they have conservation restrictions on an additional 515 more. And again, those numbers are a few years old, so don't quote me on them, but I don't think they've changed drastically. So Medfield clearly has a great quantity of open space, and it values it. Certainly the citizens value it. I value it as a citizen and use it regularly. And so I took a step back and I looked around just to see how we compare to our surrounding communities and even communities throughout the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, the state average for a town or city in Massachusetts is 18% in terms of land area that is protected as open space or conservation space, or for public recreation. Just looking around the surrounding towns of Medfield, Millis 6%, Westwood 9%, Walpole 15%, Sherborne 15%, Dover 14%, and Medfield 29%. So it's pretty clear that Medfield is kind of like an outlier. It actually ranks 35th out of 294 communities in Massachusetts as of 2018 was the latest comparison I could find. So there's a significant amount of open space, and the school site, while it is open space, and we are proposing a new building, we'd be using approximately 4 to 5 acres. To me, that's a relatively small number in the grand scheme of things, and something that is for what I believe to be an important purpose with our schools. It's not something that's going to a for-profit developer. It is not building, strip malls or something, a use that does not support the town. It supports the public good. So in terms of using open space for that, I believe it's a worthwhile endeavor. In terms of the well water, this is an issue that I've been trying to resolve for over a year. The project that we proposed doesn't pose any significant risk to our well water. Unless the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and our own town bylaws are all wrong, then there's no risk here. The building will be built to ensure that the groundwater and the drinking water is safe. We've had third-party engineer write an opinion letter based on that, stating that same fact, which I distributed through a letter to the editor via the patch a week or two ago. So the idea that somehow this is going to put our drinking water at risk just simply isn't true. This building will be built into current codes, and a large portion of the impervious area for the Wheelock site, the Wheelock School, would actually be replaced as well with current stormwater management systems, not ones that were built in the 70s. So it would actually improve the stormwater runoff from that school as well. So there's a lot of benefit to doing that, and all of those systems, would be tying them into town sewer, so it's not going into the ground. We're tying into existing utilities. We're based on a discussion we had Wednesday regarding sustainability. We're not going to be using fossil fuels on site, so there will be no storage of any fuel oils and things like that that could potentially leach into the ground. So schools are not a hazardous risk. They're permitted in these areas as of right. We don't have to do anything special except design it to current code.
Next question comes from John. It says, the only town-wide survey I have seen shows town support in favor of the Dale Street site. Why are the results of the survey, which had over 10% of all registered voters respond, not regarded more heavily?
So a couple things on this. First of all, the survey that we did was an informal survey. It was not registered voters. I don't know who on that list was registered voter and who wasn't. I'd have to check with the town clerk. It wasn't even restricted necessarily to Medfield. People could have forwarded it, and people outside of Medfield could have taken the survey. It was an informal survey. And the intent of the informal survey was to sort of see where people stood on a general basis. And it wasn't conclusive. We had 37% that did vote to support Dale, an additional 25 that preferred we lock. We had an additional 38% that were either undecided or had no preference. But we dug a little deeper and we started to look at it since there was no clear picture from that. Yes, there was a plurality that preferred Dale that took that survey. And then we dug a little deeper into the comments section, and what we started to see was there was some misconception that an addition/renovation at the Dale Street site of the existing building would be cheaper than building new. And that just simply isn't the case. When we ultimately went through our cost estimating exercise, an addition renovation is actually the most expensive. So, I think we didn't discount it by any stretch, but our role is not to sort of take it as gospel because 37% preferred that. We did the same with the grade configuration. In that survey, we asked people, because at the time we were exploring doing a grades 3 to 5 building, which would be much larger and much more expensive, in addition to the grades 4 to 5 configuration that exists today. And the same plurality preferred the grades 3 to 5 over the existing configuration of grades 4 to 5. Ultimately, after COVID hit and the town started to really give us even more feedback about cost, we made the recommendation and talked to the school committee, and the school committee and Dr. Marsden decided that it was too much to bite off to pursue the larger building. So we understand that there are some people that have preferences that differ from what we ultimately recommended. If that survey had showed 50, 60, 70% had preferred one option or the other, I think we would have taken that to heart. But it didn't. To us, it wasn't conclusive. To the selectmen, it wasn't conclusive. And so it's not that we dismissed the data that we got from it. We just didn't agree when we looked at everything as a whole and all the other facts and educational benefits that I discussed previously.
Your final question today comes from John and Ken. It says, what are the costs associated with the disposition, rebuild, destruction, or whatever for the existing Dale building? What would you recommend for the use of the current Dale Street building, and is that use something that can be done cost effectively?
So this is a great and very pertinent question right now. I also chair the permanent building committee, of which there are 5 members. All those 5 members serve on the school building committee. And as chair of the permanent building committee, our committee oversees all municipal facilities. And we're an advisory committee to the Board of Selectmen, so ultimately the decision comes to the Board of Selectmen. But we had a meeting a little over a week ago to discuss this exact issue because the town definitely wants to know what will happen with that building should we choose to abandon it as a school. I don't think any of us would like to see it sit empty or boarded up as an eyesore, but we don't see it that way. We see it as an asset. We've discussed amongst the permanent building committee the potential to move the Parks and Rec facility or department into the existing building. And that can be done for little to no cost, right? The day the school moves out, Parks and Rec could move in and take a portion of the space. They certainly wouldn't need that whole building. And serve as the sort of landlord, and there are other options for renting out some space to education collaboratives, to someone brought up to me recently that the Medfield food cupboard could use some space. So there's lots of options, which we see as an asset because the town has never had that kind of ability to be flexible. We know that the Parks and Rec department has needs and would like to expand their services so they can increase their revenue. And for them to be able to take over the building with a gym, with classroom space, with offices day one that are significantly larger, that would also give us the ability to potentially demo the FAF Center, which is a building that does not have many years left in it. Our recommendation from the permanent building committee would be that we could potentially use funds that are left over from the public safety building that came in under budget. We could use some of those funds to demolish the FAF Center and sort of redevelop that corner, potentially with a use that the Parks and Rec Commission could use, whether it be like a tennis court or a playground. We would need to discuss what that could become. But it would give them some immediate relief on their needs without having to build a brand new building for them for a little while. And then, in the future, when the town is prepared for it, then, maybe we look at a more complete renovation of that building to support the long-term efforts of Parks and Rec. But that's currently the thinking, at least in terms of what the Permanent Building Committee has discussed. We've asked the Parks and Rec Commission to go back and come back to us with an idea of how they would use that space were that to occur. But that could be done for little to no cost, and we could potentially solve two problems with one project without actually increasing the cost of that project. Ultimately, the Dale Street building, we fully recognize needs, if it's going to be an asset and remain in town as an asset, we need to put some money into it to keep it, functioning properly and not degrading over time. So that's our current thinking around that. So we expect to have more for you over the next couple of months as we start to prepare for special town meeting. It's sort of a parallel process, not necessarily tied to the school projects, but obviously we recognize that the town wants to understand what will become of that building, since we're recommending that it be no longer used as a school.
Do you mind if I have two questions? Based on what the questions were here, I kind of have two questions of my own. So the first would be, how long did you consider and how quickly did you move on from looking at the Dale Street site and rebuilding that, using that? Because that's the other argument, is that we could reuse that. Yeah. How quickly did we move from looking at that site and looking into the possibilities of that being rebuilt to then moving to this new project?
Yeah, without having my calendar of meetings in front of me, that's very full these days. I don't know the actual duration, from a schedule. What I can tell you is that, we spent a good amount of time in the early phase, what's called the PDP or preliminary design program phase, evaluating sites throughout Medfield for possible school, including the hospitals, including anything we could look at that had the right amount of space, and then we evaluated them. It quickly narrowed down to the two school sites that we have now for a lot of reasons. And then we spent some time really looking at evaluating those sites from an educational perspective, from a transportation perspective, from a safety perspective, from a cost perspective. And so we looked very hard at the ad reno scheme, and because in my mind that would be the only option on the Dale Street site that would be viable, because putting a new school in the field, like I said, would make it just so dense, it wouldn't work well as a school. But looking at the ad reno scheme, there's a couple things to take in mind. One, it was the most expensive option. And two, it's the most disruptive option for the kids. Renovating an existing building while it's operating is very difficult, and it takes a lot more time. And so what we looked at, we saw over three plus years of disruption to kids going through that school, where it would be under construction while kids are trying to learn in it. It's not unheard of. It happens all the time. But when we had an option that we felt was far better educationally, that wouldn't disrupt the kids' education and wouldn't take longer to build and wouldn't be the most expensive option, ultimately those things weighed heavily on our decision, and that's why we selected Wheelock. The total duration, it was certainly, I would say, 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that, where site selection was part of our discussions, in addition to all the other things we were working on.
I realized the other question I had was, in this, there was a question about what happens if a no vote is done. But I think another great question is what happens if a yes vote is done? So what happens if at the town meeting in the fall we decide to vote yes?
Well, that's a great question, and I hope we get to see the answer. So if the town votes yes at the special town meeting and what's slated for September, date's not set yet, then we would enter into a project funding agreement with the MSBA, which outlines, who's paying for what and how that's being paid and that type of thing. The town would borrow funds, and it would proceed through the subsequent phases of design called design development and construction documents, where the design team would further detail the drawings that would be used to bid the project to a contractor, and to make sure that we've got everything completed design-wise. The MSBA's process is a little different than how we typically have done things here in town and municipal facilities, in that they set the budget at the end of schematic design, which is fairly early, because they don't want to go too far down the line and then have it voted down, and then that seems to be a waste of money. So once we vote yes, there'll be another approximately 10 months or so of design before construction starts. But construction would start in 2022, and depending on which construction method we use, it would either open in 2024 if we decide to use a construction manager. It's a fairly complicated difference between the two, but if we use a general contractor, which is a different procurement method in Massachusetts, there is slightly more time associated with that, and based on where we would fall for the start of construction, it would have to be after the winter, so it's a little bit longer. So that pushes the schedule out probably till September of 2025.
Awesome. Is there anything left? Is there any more information that people need to know about this project?
Well, there's a boatload of information that people need to know about this project, and I hope everyone will take a look at the website. There's tons of information there off the Medfield Public Schools website under elementary school project. We are working on sort of redesigning, trying to streamline it to make sure all that information is easily accessible. We have regular meetings that are being posted. I encourage everyone to attend and ask questions. We will probably be having those on an almost bi-weekly basis for the next couple of months, because we have a lot of decisions to get through. And then we'll be doing more community public forums, and those are important because we want to make sure we're hearing from people, we're hearing from the town, and so attendance of those has been great because of Zoom. As much as Zoom can be a headache on some things, we've gotten far more participation in this project since COVID started than we ever had on any of our municipal projects in my time here in Medfield. So I actually love the idea of Zoom because people can be at home and watch their kids while still listening in and hearing about the project. It's an incredibly complex project. We're going to be publishing all sorts of information out to the community to ensure that we're informing them as thoroughly as we can. I hope that people will understand where we're coming from, and they'll listen to our case that we put in front of the town. They'll certainly be hearing from others too, the warrant committee, the board of selectmen, and other leadership in town. This is a major investment that we're recommending, and it's one that has to last this town at a minimum of 5 decades. And that type of thing, it should never be done lightly. I hope that people who see all the work that's been put into this recognize that none of the members of the school building committee, the board of selectmen, the warrant committee, anyone involved in this project, we all care deeply. None of us are taking any of this lightly, and this is something that hopefully will serve this town for many years to come.